today on Mother Mayhem.
What you're talking about here is holding both. How do you love the mom who did endlessly play with you as a kid? And how do you hold on to those good memories while also reconciling with yourself that that might be her limit in how she loves you? That might be as good as it gets. Hi, it's Heather. Welcome back to Mother Mayhem. If you're the daughter of a narcissistic or emotionally limited mom, you belong here. Today we have another listener Q&A episode, and I'm so proud of that. And I'm so grateful to each of you women who are writing in, sharing your vulnerable stories, and really opening yourself up to healing. This is exactly what I wanted for this show and what I was hoping it would become. And I'm so very glad it's happening. And I'm really, really glad that you're here. Today, we're talking to Carly. And yes, I totally stole that name from General Hospital. I always liked the name. And now that I got the idea to steal names from popular culture, I think renaming my letter writers is about to be my new favorite hobby. Carly and I were in a bit of a back and forth, and that's how this episode came to be. She first shared her story to let me know that it had made an impact on her and then when I invited her to share a question, she was willing to be vulnerable and do so. So I edited this down a little bit to make the conversation that we had make sense to all of you, but nothing else has been edited or changed. I'm reading Carly's words in their entirety. Anyone who writes in or shares this story, I'm going to be doing the same for you. Part of narcissistic abuse recovery work is really getting at practice, at taking up space, being seen, speaking your truth. And I want this show to be a vehicle for recovery. I don't want you to just be hearing about narcissistic abuse and be like, oh, yeah, that happened to me, and then feel seen and validated because I talked about something that you feel or that you experience. What I really want this to be is about healing and recovery. And so choices I make are deliberate, and the choice I make to include people's letters in their entirety is deliberate and intentional. All of you are in this together, healing from this experience, and I'm so grateful to be guiding you. This is what Carly had to say. I had an argument with my mom very recently, and it seems as though things have finally come to a head. It is something I've been avoiding for a few years because I didn't feel like I was ready to confront her. It all started about 5 years ago when I started dating my now husband. He began seeing things in my mom that I never noticed and started bringing them to my attention. It isn't normal for a mom to do that, or that isn't how a mom should be treating her kids. I just brushed everything off because I was too scared of my mom and hated any sort of confrontation. When we got engaged, it got worse because there were these family issues that interfered with the wedding. My parents have been divorced and remarried for quite a while and are not on good terms. At this point, there was a custody battle and court stuff going on between my parents regarding my younger sister. I used to get in the middle of my parents on matters like this and would typically take my mom's side on everything and just back her up. Well, during this time of my engagement, I set a boundary and I told her I wouldn't be taking sides at all and would appreciate it if she didn't update me and didn't tell me anything that happened between her and my dad, and she didn't like it very much. At the time, I'd also had an argument with my dad and stepmom because I didn't want my stepmom to come to the wedding. A little while later, I had a change of heart about the whole thing and wanted to fix things, so I decided against the decision. My mom was happy when I didn't want my stepmom coming, and then now that I chose to fix things with them, she became really upset. And she kept saying, "You don't know what you're asking me to do to be in the same place as them," and asked if I would be willing to have a smaller wedding for her to come to when we got back. This was really hurtful, and long story short, my wedding season, while mostly wonderful, because I got to marry my best friend, was also filled with all of this underlying turmoil. I would love it if my story helps others in the future in a similar situation. For years, and even sometimes now, I've questioned why my mom was so different from someone else and why she couldn't just be normal. If anyone else is feeling this way, I want them to know that they're not the only ones, so if this helps them in some way, somehow, by all means, please do share it. I've done so much research about narcissists, and I've heard that there are different kinds of narcissists. I believe that my mom is the engulfing, somewhat mild one. She made me and my siblings her entire life growing up and could be controlling, overbearing, but also fun, caring, kind, and loving. She was almost like a kid herself and would get on our level and play with us and take us out for fun experiences, but then she was also the main disciplinarian, and I was scared of her, but I also loved her so much. I think if I had a question, it would be, how can I balance that? How do I try to handle all of the traumas that I'm still processing while also being grateful that she was my mom and try to have a healthy relationship with her? I worry about going no contact with her because I do still love her, and I also fear what that would look like at family gatherings. I'm very close to her side of the family, especially her twin sister, my aunt, and my grandmother, her mother. It makes me sad that things are like this right now, but I know that I have a lot of healing to do and a lot of things to work on. I just sent her a long letter and got everything out on the table that I had been holding on to for years. Things that I've never felt I could tell her because I was too scared of the confrontation in person or over the phone. She's also very difficult to speak to in those ways because she really does not listen. She speaks over me, and I often just feel so unheard. I felt that there was no way for me to really work anything out with her until I told her everything I was feeling. My mom's an intimidating person to talk to, and it feels like she always has power over the entire conversation. I'm very non confrontational, and I feel so meek next to her. I think all of this has made me realize that I have a lot of work to do on myself to heal and grow. Even though I don't know you, Heather, I cannot thank you enough for being a safe place for women to come and talk about this. I am thankful that you started this podcast, and I look forward to hearing and learning more on my journey towards healing. Thank you. Whew, okay, now. So, before we dive into my response to Carly, I want to remind you all of something that I feel really sensitive about and is really important to me. All of you are going to be coming to this show with your own stories, just like Carly's, experiences and questions that you're going to have. And most, if not all of you, are listening to this right now with some form of trauma in your own history or in your current life. And as I prepare this show, there is never going to be any way for me to know what content was going to create what kinds of reactions or tensions in people and what content won't. I also can't talk about this without creating content that isn't going to create some kind of reaction. We are talking about your trauma, so it is natural, normal, and anticipated that part of these conversations are going to be talking about things that are hard for you to hear. I imagine that anything and everything in these conversations could likely create a reaction for any one of you. That's why I feel such enormous of responsibility to get it right for all of you, and why I spend so much time sometimes recording and re recording to make sure that I get it right. I want you all to know that I'm always going to be sensitive to this, but I also have to lean on my trust of you. If you're listening to this and it's too hard for you, if you just heard Carly's story, for example, and you're like, that is my life, that is my story, and you find yourself overwhelmed with emotion and finding it difficult versus affirming and validating, it's okay to stop. If you need a moment or you feel yourself disconnecting, it is okay to pause. You can work on your grounding techniques and you can always come back. You can listen to these episodes at your pace, or you can take a pass on some episodes altogether. You get to say when, you get to say where, and you get to say stop. This is an important, crucial tenet of my work with women when we're in session together. I want to include it in here for all of you too, because it's my intention to run this podcast. I know I'm going to mess it up from time to time. I'm going to give too much information without offering a break for breath, or I'm going to forget that we're talking about really hard things. But it's really important to me that you take care of yourselves as you listen, and that you trust yourself to know that if it is not the right time for you to listen, it is simply not the right time. If it's not the right episode for you to listen to, It's not the right episode, and that's okay. So, Carly, here we go. You and me in it together. Let me just say something about weddings. They make narcissistic moms lose their ever living goddamn minds. I have two clients right now who identify their engagements and weddings as the impetus for figuring out that their moms were narcissistic. So, given the conversations that we have had in earlier episodes of this show, I'm sure it's starting to make sense for a lot of you. In getting married, you are, by definition, changing the relationship you have with your mom. And narcissists really struggle with change. They fear what it's going to mean. They fear losing status. They fear losing influence. And they fear being forgotten by you. Your wedding and your engagement signaled for your mom that she's likely going to be losing control, and thus she had her meltdown. What I first want to remind all of you here is most narcissists aren't plotting this whole thing out in a step by step fashion. It is very likely that your mom saw you getting closer to your fiance and now husband and experienced it all as an energy shift inside herself. Before she could connect head to heart and name her feelings, she felt something inside her that told her something was amiss. The way I describe it for people, it's something akin to like a spidey sense. So she senses the changing tide as a shift in energy inside herself. And then she responds to that shift in energy with these learned patterns of behavior that have released tensions for her in the past previously. So last week, for example, we were talking to Nancy, and Nancy's mom belittled her and targeted Nancy because of Nancy's weight. The reasons for this were probably varied, but the main one is likely that it worked. Nancy's mom learned over time that when she belittled Nancy because of her weight, Nancy would respond in a predictable way that likely met her mom's need for control. When narcissists do this, it's largely reactive, but what people don't really recognize oftentimes is it's also subconscious. They haven't connected to their feelings. It's part of what makes them narcissists is that they can't connect to their feelings. So they just get this sense or a threat and they seek to obliterate it as quickly as possible. And they're going to use their most reliable weapons to dispense of that threat as quickly as possible. People like to give narcissists so much credit for thinking this all through and plotting it ahead. And for some, most of them, I would say, they're just these learned patterned ways of maintaining control. And then they use those strategies on repeat because they worked. If we create the narrative that your mom somehow deliberately made a conscious choice to ruin your wedding, it's really diabolical. And that narrative can be really traumatizing. It can be re traumatizing of old wounds if we create that story. And I'm not sure that that was the story. So here's how I like to think of it. Your mom was emotionally limited and incapable of managing her feelings around the whole event. And then as a result, she ended up acting out. And I don't say this to let her off the hook, excuse her for her behavior, or in any way give her a pass. I'm only saying this because it's quite diabolical if we imagine your mom consciously thought to ruin your wedding. It is such a harmful thought that can really do damage. Rather, we have to look at your mom as emotionally limited and incapable of managing her own feelings about the event. And so, as a result, she ended up acting out. And I'm not telling you this to let her off the hook, to in any way take her side, to excuse her for her behavior, or to give her any kind of pass. I want to relieve you of your story that this was in any way a deliberate attempt to destroy your wedding. We give her too much credit if we think about it in that way. Rather, she was having this reaction inside herself. It was about her. It had nothing to do with you. And she was doing what she needed to do to relieve herself of all the internal attention the entire thing was causing her. One of the things when these kinds of things happen, I tell my clients is, yep, your mom's a narcissist. She did her job. She did what narcissists do. And I don't say this to be entirely facetious. I'm saying this to adjust everyone's expectations of their mothers. Your mom was not capable of managing your wedding with any kind of grace. If she was, we wouldn't be talking about her narcissism. This is the knowledge that lets us hold grace for her. But it also is what has to prompt us to keep her in her place. Your mom was not going to be able to control herself. You probably saw it coming from a mile away. So as a result, you had to control her for her. And Carly, it isn't fair that you had to do it. You didn't deserve her resistance. You didn't deserve her pushback. It wasn't your fault. And there was nothing you could have done or said to change what happened. Whatever you may have done and whatever you would have said, if you had done it differently, she would have just picked something else. Because that's what narcissists do. That's their job. So, right about now is normally where I'd be offering you some kind of gentle reminder on the importance of boundaries and your right to have them and the importance in using them. And I could see that from your letter, you already took that class and you already very much have your own back. And I'm so glad that you married someone who sees you and acknowledges what you deserve. That kind of love in itself, Carly, is going to be so healing of your trauma and of your history. That kind of love is going to help you with narcissistic abuse recovery. Sometimes the way with that isn't always clear, but I promise you it's true. I got to tell you, I really love that you wrote your mom a note. You didn't share in that how she responded to your letter or how things have been with her since. But I want to use your example as an opportunity to talk to you and other women about these kinds of letters. Because we don't write these letters, we don't choose to speak up or set these boundaries for the mothers. We do these kinds of things and write these kinds of letters for ourselves. You do it for yourself. You write that letter because not writing that letter no longer works for you. So, what this means for you, Carly, and everyone listening is the letter doesn't get written with the hope that your mom is going to see the light, that she's going to own the error of her ways or work to have a better relationship with you. The letter gets written so you can say, "This is me. This is what happened to me. This is my truth. This is how your behavior has impacted me." If the only reason you or anyone else is listening and contemplating a letter like this is because so this time your mom will really get it, I have to be honest with you that more often than not, that is just a setup to fail. Most narcissists, by definition, are incapable of receiving such feedback without responding with narcissism. So I've helped a lot of clients over the years write these letters, and they can be so powerful and so impactful, but you can't do it and set yourself up into thinking that this time it's really going to change things. Oftentimes it doesn't. We write the truth because it's ours, and we write the truth because we wish to own it. That letter you wrote was a really good idea, and I hope it was well received. But Carly, if it wasn't, I want you to know that that doesn't mean you shouldn't have done it, that you didn't explain yourself well, or that you did anything to make it worse. All it means is that your mom was held accountable and she dodged it. And that's what many narcissists are going to do. Good on you, Carly, for setting them and sticking to them. Good on you for protecting yourself and the experience you wanted to have at your own wedding. I and everyone else listening knows that that wasn't an easy thing to do. We also know how heartbreaking it was and how crushing it was that you actually had to do it. That your mom is someone that you had to set boundaries on for your own gosh darn wedding. It just sucks, Carly, and I'm so sorry for you that that was your truth. And I'm grateful that I can use your letter here, Carly, as an opportunity to talk a little bit more about boundaries in general with an applicable example and not just a hypothetical like I've had to do in some of my previous episodes before y'all started kindly writing in. We set boundaries for ourselves. We do it to protect our peace, and you did it for you in this instant to protect the peace that you wanted to have at your own wedding. But I have to say and use this as an opportunity to share something about boundaries that not a lot of people talk about. Boundaries make everybody feel safe. They make all of us feel safe. Us non-narcissists. Boundaries are good. We like to know the speed limit. We like to know what the rules are. We like to know what's expected of us. What time we're supposed to show up. What time we're supposed to leave. Boundaries help people feel safe. Now, narcissists, they're not going to outwardly act like they like their boundaries. And they're not going to be grateful to know where they end and other people begin. But I want to share a perspective here because I think it's valuable. My career, like where I started before I was doing this, I started when I was working with emotionally limited kids in residential programming. Admittedly, one of the reasons why I'm in front of you now is because a lot of these kids had emotionally limited moms, and as a result, they acted out from their own trauma, had all kinds of trouble. And so they're the root of what brought me here today and what they're so foundational in my experience and my understanding of trauma and recovery. If we just think about these kids for a second, they were all victims of various traumas. And as a result, they had these acting out behaviors that made it unsafe for them to live at home or in the community. And many of these kids, their moms lost parental rights entirely, or they had temporarily lost them for failing to take care of their kids one too many times. So, teaching these kids rules and structures was a core part of the work. They felt so out of control inside that they really needed help controlling their outside. That's what the limits, the rules, and the boundaries did for those kids. It helped them control themselves. They learned limits about where their behavior or space ended and someone else's began. Now, I'm not sure what your impressions of me are so far, or if you would even believe me if I told you this, but I was a stickler for the rules. I was pretty gosh darn strict. Kids didn't get a lot of passes from me. I'm also going to tell you that I was the kid's favorite. More often than not, for more kids than not, I was the favorite. I say that with some pride. I say that with some ego. But I was the favorite because I was trusted. Kids knew what to expect of me. Kids responded to my consistency. And because I was consistent, they could create a healthy attachment with me. I say this because we're all just grown-up kids, all of us, me talking to you, you listening, and narcissism for your mom, what it feels like for her to move through the world in the way that she has to move through the world, it's similar to how it felt for those kids. They feel so out of control of their insides that they need the outside for the structure so that they can actually feel more in control. And like most kids, none of them are going to thank you for setting the limit on them. Kids were fond of telling me to fuck off on the regular. And then they'd end up earning a consequence for that one too. But they started to trust me. Boundaries tell kids that we're paying attention, that we give a shit. Kids would get these day passes from their homes. I was just telling the story the other day. That's why it's coming to top of mind. So kids would get these day passes and they'd be able to go home for the day and leave the program for a while. It was also that they could practice the skills they were learning in the program and go off and use them in the community. And so one night, a group of these kids were talking at dinner about their passes, and one of the kids complained about how their mom didn't let her out of the house at all. And another complained that she only got to see a friend for an hour out of the 6 hours that she was out of the program. And a third member, she's sitting at the table and she's sitting and just listening. And then she says, I was next door the entire time I had my pass. My mom didn't care. At least your moms gave a shit. Again, think about what I just said. We're all just grown-up kids. And when we're emotionally compromised like those kids or like your mom is, like it or not, a part of them knows that they need those limits. A part of them energetically gets that a boundary means you care. If you didn't set a boundary, it would actually send a message, intended or not, that you can't be bothered. While the narcissist might blow up over the boundaries placed on them, and that kind of reaction from narcissists, honestly, it gets a lot of airtime. And I would argue that maybe sometimes it gets too much airtime because anecdotally, I have to tell you, I see a lot of narcissists get into line and respect the boundary even if they do so with some initial resistance or begrudging acceptance. I have a client right now whose mom was like blowing up their phone on the regular, at work, at home, at all hours. And my client cut off all contact and said email only. And now the mother is at email only and is respecting that limit and respecting that boundary. Setting the boundary with your mom, it signals to them that you're actually still trying to have a relationship with them. Your mom might not connect that head to heart. That's what I was talking about before. She's only going to experience your boundary setting as an energy shift inside her, but she is capable of receiving that message. The real issue here, when we're talking about all of this, is how do you come to this place of acceptance that this is your mom, that your mom is someone who needs this boundary, and that in some ways you need to mother her with limits in a way that she could actually never mother you. And there is a world of hurt in that realization and in that truth. And so many of you, in addition to Carly, are listening to this and needing to come to that truth. And God damn it, it hurts sometimes. And how do you even begin? Carly, I got to tell you, you start as you've already done by talking to your husband and talking to trusted loved ones. And you continue by sharing your truth and by being in the company of other people who want to listen and support you and understand. So this show, but also places in your real life with your friends who want to listen and who want to support you in this journey that you're on. What you're talking about here is holding both. How do you love the mom who did endlessly play with you as a kid? And how do you hold on to those good memories while also reconciling with yourself that that might be her limit in how she loves you? That might be as good as it gets. We do this by remembering that two things, even opposing things, can be true at the same time. You can love your mom who read you bedtime stories with drama and disguised voices, and you can also be hurt and betrayed by the mom who spoke over you, denied your truth, or bullied you into submission before you could hold her accountable for her actions. Both things can be true about your mom, and we can use that knowledge to plan and act accordingly. First, though, we have to grieve that this is true and that we feel those feelings when they come up. We work those feelings through because most of you aren't used to doing that part. You're not used to seeing feelings through. You're used to shoving them down, pushing them aside, minimizing them. And it's going to take work to get used to acknowledging your feelings, acknowledging that grief and that sadness, and seeing those feelings through without blowing them off or without disregarding them. But then it's also going to be about getting clear about what kind of relationship you want to have with your mom, given her limitations. In your letter, Carly, you asked me about going no contact. And while some therapists and social media content people, they spend a lot of time preaching no contact. But I have to tell you, it is not my first go to as a recommendation unless a client feels it in their body that it's time to go no contact. Then, in those instances, we don't pass go, we don't collect $200, we go straight to no contact because their body is telling them it's time. And I got to tell you, it's really rare for that bell to ever get unrung. Once you start thinking no contact and feeling no contact, it's not really common that you might not take action on it, but that doesn't mean you suddenly stop thinking that you might need it or want it. More likely, what happens for people is learning to live in this messy middle. If you're not keen on no contact, if you are trying to sit in that messy middle of holding both, of loving the mom who put you to bed at night, but holding limits with the mom who struggles with accepting your life the way you're living it, then you cannot let the internet shame you or other therapists shame you into thinking you have poor boundaries if you don't go no contact. Don't think of this as you're not doing real trauma work if you don't go no contact. Instead, what we're learning here is how you can have a relationship with your mom given her limitations. Remember what I've said about narcissistic personality disorder? It is a relationship impairment. By definition, your mom is not going to be able to engage in this healthy, unconditionally loving relationship with you. Expecting her to be different, that's going to be one of those setups to fail in a way. Rather, we want you to work to establish on how you can have a relationship with her given her limitations. For example, if she's always been good at organizing closets or gardening, maybe you're inviting her over to help you with those things. You're not going to invite her to have a heart to heart over adjusting to married life if that isn't a conversation that she's going to be able to have. You get a sense of what she's capable of, what you can tolerate without you yourself being hurt, and then you navigate that messy middle with boundaries. Boundaries in the messy middle, what's that going to look like? You're probably asking and wondering that. What's it going to sound like? I'm going to spitball with you a couple. Here goes. It might sound like, Mom, I need you to call before you come over, and you need to hear from me that it's an okay time. If you come to my door unannounced, I need you to know that I'm not going to answer the door. I'll send you away, and I'm not going to open anything that you leave at my doorstep. Here's another example. Mom, I know you miss me during the day, but I can't answer calls at work. I'm putting you on my do not disturb list while I'm at work. And if you call my work phone or if you email me or you try to invade my space, I'm going to need to block you. Another example might be, Mom, I understand your curiosity about my marriage, but you have said some pretty hurtful things to me about my relationship, and my relationship with my husband is not going to be open for discussion. Now, you might say something like, I know you're used to talking to me about your divorce or about dad, but we saw with the wedding that it was really hard for you to talk to me about those things respectfully. And I need you to know that my relationship with my dad, his wife, and my sister, they're going to be separate of the relationship I have with you. I love all of you, and I don't wish to be in the middle anymore, so I'm not going to be talking about this. And if you mention something, I'm not going to participate. If you keep mentioning something, we're ending the visit or the chat, and we can always try again next time. Now, it might even say if we're going to get really direct. So it might sound something like, Mom, this is me trying to have a relationship with you. When you say things like X or Y, it makes me think and feel A and B. I just got married. I have so many good things in my life right now, and I want you to be a part of them. But if you can't accept my choices as mine or talk to me in a way that's considerate, I'm going to be placing more distance between us. The key here, all of you listening, is remembering that you're saying all of this and you're doing all of this not for your mom, not for the expectation that she's going to change her ways. You're doing it for you. You are creating the conditions under which you can have a relationship with your mom without compromising or taxing your own mental health or mental well being. We can't be surprised when narcissists disrespect our boundaries or step over them. That's what narcissists do. That's what makes them narcissists. All we can do in response is decide who we want to be in response to how they show up for us. We determine how we want to move through the world based on how the other person is treating us, and we work to instill that consistency within ourselves for maintaining that boundary and protecting our own peace. Carly, one of the things I do in session with my own clients when I'm about to make a point that could sting is I say, okay, take a deep breath. This one might hurt a bit. And it's like sending the warning shot. Just breathe into it, breathe through it. So, Carly and everyone listening, take a little bit of a deep breath because this one might hit a little close to home. I also wanted to touch on something else that you said. You mentioned fearing going no contact because of the awkward situation it would create with your mom's family. Here's the thing, Carly. Your mom's family, they very likely know all about your mom. They are all too familiar with her tendency to intimidate, to bully, and to otherwise influence people so that she can get her own way. They know how she seeks drama. They know how she plays the victim to her own story, how she uses emotional manipulation to get what she wants. And it is highly unlikely, my friend, that you are the only one in her family who feels held captive and hostage by your mom's tendencies and ways of being. Stating the truth about your mom, even to her family and especially to her twin, is likely hardly going to come as a shock. What you're probably not used to is speaking ill of your mom publicly. And I first want to remind you that it is a natural consequence that when you bully someone, emotionally manipulate someone, or exert undue pressure on someone, you are going to make that person unhappy. Your mom made you unhappy because she put undue pressure, she emotionally manipulated, and she bullied you. As a result of being unhappy because of your mom, you get to create distance. I would imagine that if a conversation with your grandmother, if you were having one, it might go something like this: Gram, I love you. I love us. Right now, it's been really hard with mom. She's saying some really mean things. She's hurting my feelings and it's causing me some distress. I don't need you to be in the middle of us, but I did want you to know that I'm taking space from mom these days. I haven't been accepting her phone calls, or I've let her know that I need to hang up if she starts talking about dad. I don't want my conflict with mom affecting us, and I hope that it won't. You might say something to your aunt that's a little bit similar, and you don't need to process your hurt feelings with them unless you feel safe and comfortable doing so. You also, Carly, you don't need them to agree with you. You just need them to know your truth. So, what they do next with your truth, that's up to them. In some families, that leads to you needing to further protect yourself from their unhealthy reaction, because the thing about apples and trees is true. But that doesn't mean that you don't get to talk about it or that you can't say something. And it doesn't seem all that likely that you're going to need to impose these boundaries on your family. But it's not a bad idea to just protect yourself with the idea. What I'm really offering you here is just another opportunity to speak and stick to your truth. Carly, as you said, all of this is still pretty new to you, and it's going to be new to a lot of the people listening. It's new for you to think of your mom in this way, and you might be reverberating a little bit from all of it. And I think a lot of narcissistic abuse recovery work, it's a process. You don't have to do it all quickly. You don't have to wrap yourself up in all of this and make recovery your full-time job unless you're being impacted by it at that intense of a level. What's really important here is that you work on trusting yourself, that you work on believing yourself. One of the things I like to work on with my clients is actually work on regularly telling yourself, I believe me. Take one thing at a time. Gather your tribe, those people who treat you well, that respect you, and have your back. This is really hard work. It's a lot. And I am really grateful to you for sharing your story so that other people know it wasn't only their mom at their wedding. I want to tell you personally, I really enjoyed our exchange, and I'm so grateful for your support of the show. Thank you so much for letting me use our exchange as an episode today. And anybody listening, if you too have a question for the show or you have a story you want to share, please don't hesitate to reach out. These episodes are starting to line up. Even before I hit record, another letter came in. So we have more and more of these listener Q&As coming up over the next several episodes, and you're always welcome to get your question in line. You can send a recorded voice memo or an email to heather@daughtersnpd.com. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm so enjoying our time together. Until next time, all of you are in it together, and I am in it with you. Bye for now. I'm so grateful that you're here. You're right where you're supposed to be. At its heart, I'm hoping to use this show to build a community of women working together to heal from childhoods marked by maternal narcissism and emotional neglect. My goal for Mother Mayhem is that this show becomes an advice and mentoring driven show where you share your questions, struggles, and stories, and I offer you direction for healing and recovery. That can't happen without your contributions. I invite you to send a recorded voice memo or write in an email with your questions and things you're struggling with. You can always find me over at heather@daughtersnpd.com. To connect further, I invite you to find me over at Instagram and occasionally on TikTok at DaughtersNPD. If you know another woman who needs this conversation in her life, I'm going to ask that you share the show with her. You can help me get the word out with your reviews and social shares of the show, and I hope you'll consider doing so. Special thanks to Heather Clark for editing this show. She's in my head and knows what I meant to say when the words come out backwards. Thanks for your time today. I'm always in it with you. Bye for now.